Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 5 must-starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be going over some news around the National Football League, but then going over my 2 must-starter sits at the running back position. I know it's a little bit different than the hidden gems, but we're going to try something different here on Friday. Now, before we get into that, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, join the community, click that subscribe button, be one of the 10,000 subscribers of this channel. It's absolutely incredible. Me just saying it, it's just weird. Thank you guys again for the support and joining the community. If you guys haven't yet already, click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content and let you know when my latest content is out, live streams, videos, etc. Also, don't forget to click that like button on today's video. I really do appreciate it. Hey guys, how's it going? All right, so like I mentioned, we're not going to be doing hidden gems today. It may be a little bit different, but as of right now, in the current landscape of fantasy football, a lot of the hidden gems for Week 5 have kind of been dried up, as you could say. There's 2 teams on bye week, and as the weeks progress, hidden gems are going to be harder to find. But this week, I wanted to try something different. I wanted to talk about some must-starter sits. We're going to be talking about 2 running backs in specific. We're going to talk about David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears and Josh Jacobs of the Oakland Raiders, 2 rookie running backs that many of you guys in the landscape as of right now invested pretty highly in them in your respective drafts. You guys took these running backs early in order to hope that they could potentially be breakout stars. They haven't, they've shown some bits here and there, but nothing too big to really buy in on their performances as of right now. But I really do think Week 5 is a pivotal moment as we continue to get, moving on in this season, as we approach the playoffs. These wins are becoming more and more important, and making sure you start and sit the right guys is extremely important as well. So we want to focus in on 2 of these running backs. If you guys like today's episode, I'll continue to add these if I can on a running backs video day, like on Tuesdays. I'll have an attached, starter sit video with multiple running backs, or with Wednesday. So you let me know, guys, if this kind of interests you. Then we'll continue to progress with this kind of stuff. But also, really quickly, before we talk about these running backs, I wanted to talk about some news. Thursday night news. Am I surprised that the Rams got smacked? In terms of their defense, no. I thought, the Rams had every chance to win that game. Jared Goff threw an interception late, as he typically does. The field goal that missed, that's unfortunate, but, the Rams had every opportunity to win that game. As a Rams fan, you can't do anything about that. Overall, the Seahawks played great. They were able to dictate the game by running the ball, made some questionable decisions late in that game. And 3rd and goal, in the red zone, they ran the ball for like 4 yards and then went forward on 4th down. Very gutsy decision-making over there by the Seahawks down in the red zone. I started to see flashes of them in the Super Bowl versus the Patriots. It was beginning to really bother me at times. But, hey, they pulled it out. They clutched it out. Chris Carson, fantastic performance. Russell Wilson, needless to say, one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League. But last night, his ability to move in the pocket, to use his legs and find open receivers is unbelievable. I really do believe Russell Wilson is just, I can't even, he's up there. He really is up there with the elite class. There's a reason why they paid him all that money. And then when you look at Jared Goff and see how much they paid him, you begin to be like, oh my God, what are the Rams doing? But regardless, outside of that, you had Tyler Lockett perform. He caught that early touchdown. After that, pretty quiet. Cooper Kupp is a monster. Robert Woods had an okay game. Really had an opportunity. If you put those 2 feet down in the end zone, has a touchdown late in that game. Will Disley continues to perform on a weekly basis, double-digit fantasy points, looking like a great contributor in that offense. We saw a little bit of Rashad Penny, which I wasn't surprised about. I anticipated that, like I talked to you guys about on Thursday or on the Tuesday running back video. He was in for a couple drive series. Thank you for Chris Carson at least catching that ball in the end zone and really not giving Rashad Penny a chance to take that job from you. So absolutely fantastic there. Todd Gurley, 2 touchdowns. That's pretty much all you can ask for. Gerald Everett had a fantastic performance for the 2nd consecutive week. A lot of that had to do with Brandon Cooks going down. When you have Brandon Cooks going down, Josh Reynolds, the wide receiver for the Rams, he is not a good enough wide receiver to come out and perform. They were finding a lot of production in their tight ends in Higbee and Everett. Everett had a good game, so we'll talk about him on the Monday waiver wire edition. But for now, that's basically that. A couple more pieces of information for those of you trying to stay up to date. Sam Darnold is going to miss this weekend. Therefore, you probably do not want to start any of your Jets wide receivers. On top of it, Colt McCoy has been named the starting quarterback of the Washington Redskins. Therefore, you probably don't want to start any of your Redskins wide receivers or tight ends. It's just maybe Chris Thompson. I think that's the only guy I trust. Maybe Vernon Davis. You play in a super deep league. Outside of that, Tyreek Hill's been ruled out. T.Y. Hilton is likely going to play because he's practiced for the last 2 days in a row. What was the other information that I saw? I have to go. Deshaun Jackson is also out. Moving on, Jarvis Landry has been cleared with concussion protocol. Will play on Monday night versus the 49ers. He moves up in the rankings. Certainly, Austin Eckler is going to see a big role as we anticipated because they're not going to force Melvin Gordon back so quickly after really not seeing much work. Devontae Adams ruled out. Mike Williams says he's going to play on Sunday, which is irrelevant, but at least it helps Keenan Allen. All right, guys, that's the news. Hopefully, we've covered all those bases. If you want more news, Sunday morning we'll be doing a live stream. So for those of you who are interested, check that out on Sunday morning. We usually typically start about 8:30 to game time, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you guys are available and want to come talk, chat, ask questions, I'll try to get to everybody. That's what we're doing on Sunday morning. But let's talk about my 2 starter sits, the real meat and potatoes of this episode now that we've gotten past all of this excess stuff. We're talking about these 2 running backs. We're talking about David Montgomery and Josh Jacobs. Now, let's talk about my must start. I truly do believe that David Montgomery is a must start for this week. He cannot be on your bench. If he is on your bench, then you must have so much depth at the running back position that you are filling your 2 RB spots and your flex with studs. So if that's the case, then so be it. But I really do believe for those of you who are looking for a running back to carry you rest of the season, I think this is the last week to purchase and buy the stock of David Montgomery because I really do believe he's going to break out and produce going forward. Let's just talk about his snap counts and his rushing attempts over the last couple of weeks. We've seen a great trend from week 1. Week 1 against the Green Bay Packers, when they came out and they didn't feed him the ball, and we saw a lot of Mike Davis and we saw a lot of Tariq Cohen, a lot of worry began to set in for David Montgomery owners. But what have we seen in the last 3 weeks? David Montgomery, 18 rushing attempts, 13 rushing attempts, 21 rushing attempts. That is a fantastic trend. He continues to see more and more opportunity in this backfield and becoming more of that Jordan Howard-esque role in this backfield, which is exactly what we want to see. Moving on, in the last 3 weeks, in terms of snap counts, the guys had 44%, 67%, then this last week, 69% of the offensive snaps. Now, why is that valuable? Sure, Tariq Cohen is always going to get his work in this backfield, but Mike Davis has all but disappeared in this offense. In the last 3 weeks, Mike Davis went from 25% snap shares to 1% to 0% last week against the Minnesota Vikings. We've all but seen him disappear. He is not going to be used in this offense. Perhaps, sure, he's going to dress, but he is not going to be used in or played over David Montgomery going forward, and that's exactly what we want to see as Montgomery owners. Absolutely. On top of it, yes, Tariq Cohen does get work in this backfield. That's for certain. He was so great last year. They're going to continue to use him, and especially because of the fact that Chase Daniels is going to be the starting quarterback of this matchup against the Raiders, which is funny. These 2 players play against each other, which wasn't intentional, but it happened to be the way it is. But anyway, Tariq Cohen was the subject. The thing is, he's going to play, and it's inevitable that he gets a couple targets. But in the last 3 weeks, what have we seen in terms of targets? Tariq Cohen, 14 targets, and on the other side, David Montgomery, 11 targets. It's really not that big of a disparity between the 2. They haven't really used Tariq Cohen like they did in week 1. They used him all over the formation. They used him as a slot receiver. We have yet to see him get back into that kind of a role. As of late, he's been really used out of the backfield. But again, we have seen Montgomery catch 3 passes each of the last 2 weeks, which is very comfortable for fantasy owners in a PPR format. And he's always got the ability to break one out for a good chunk of yards, which is absolutely great because on a 3rd down situation, having David Montgomery in the game, it helps you out absolutely because he's also a great pass blocker that he's shown from college. So moving on. Now that we've going into this matchup against the Raiders, what can we see David Montgomery potentially produce? In the last 4 weeks, what have the Raiders been able to do in terms of giving up points to opposing running backs? As a defense, they've been decent at times. Okay, let's talk about this. Week 1 against the Broncos, to Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman. The combination of the two had 21 rushes for 99 rushing yards. Perfectly fine. They also got some work in the passing game. Then week 2 against the Chiefs, they played against Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy. Now, those two combined for 20 rushing attempts, but only 31 rushing yards. Now, the reason was because the Raiders came out early in that game and took a 10-0 lead. And it was the first time that the Chiefs hadn't scored in the first quarter in God knows how long. I think they almost I think they broke Aaron Rodgers' record, but they weren't able to continue it or something like that. But for sure, it had to do with game script. When you're down early in the first half, the Chiefs came out and they threw for the rest of the game and they blew out the Raiders, didn't let them score another point. Then that's why the Chiefs couldn't really put up too much of a rushing total on them. The next week against the Minnesota Vikings, a matchup where it was all Vikings all day long, and the Raiders really couldn't string anything together. We saw Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison combined for 28 rushing attempts, 168 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. That's exactly what we want to see. We want to see a team that's going to dominate on the ground and consistently produce on a team like this, especially if the defense for the Chicago Bears can lock down the Raiders' offense, which I anticipate happening. Also, this past week against the Colts, the Colts couldn't do anything. They were down early, similar to how the Chiefs were. What did that do? That killed a lot of Marlon Mack's value. So when you look at the 14 rushing attempts for 45 yards that are the combination of both Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines from this past week's game, and the fact that Marlon Mack missed majority of that second half due to an ankle injury, there's a lot to be said. A lot of this Raiders defense stopping the run has to do with game scripts. They were up for majority of week 1 against the Broncos. They were up for the first half against the Chiefs. They were pretty much losing the entire game against the Vikings. No wonder they got 170 yards rushing put on them. And then this past week, they were up early and pretty much maintained that lead against the Colts. So what do I anticipate seeing this week? It's going to be a one-sided affair in London this week. Pretty early game. You better get your clocks ready to watch that one. We're going to have the Chicago Bears defense getting after the Raiders. Khalil Mack is going to put some revenge down on this team, and I really do believe it's going to be dictated by David Montgomery offensively. When you have Chase Daniels at the quarterback position, you're not going to be able to run a normal offense. Sure, Chase Daniels has proven, even last year, that he can win games as a starting quarterback of this team, but I truly do believe they're going to put a lot of the weight and the pressure on David Montgomery's back. We saw him last week with 21 rushing attempts. If they can continuously feed him the ball 18-plus times a game, which they can do either on the ground or through the passing game, he is going to proceed to find some success within this offense. Again, on top of it, Vontaze Burfict with that hit that he took and he made last week, against Jack Doyle, hit him pretty hard. He's gone. Suspended for the entire season. That's a middle linebacker or an interior linebacker, that is going to contribute defensively. He's gone. What does that do? That opens up more opportunity for David Montgomery to play against defenders that just aren't of par and of the ability to stop him. I think that this coming week, David Montgomery needs to be in your lineup. It's going to be a one-sided affair. It's going to be the Bears running all over the Raiders. The Raiders having a tough time moving the ball in general. We'll get into that with Josh Jacobs, but I really do believe that David Montgomery, he's a must-start this week. All right, so here's the thing. Now that we've gone over David Montgomery, we can talk about my must-sit of the week, which is Josh Jacobs, which is interesting because he plays on the opposite side of the ball in this matchup. And typically I don't like to tell people that they must avoid and they must sit players. Typically when I do my 1 through 36 rankings, even though I don't want some people to play Aaron Jones against the Eagles or play specific matchups because of how difficult they are, finding the end zone is a quick remedy, and so is being able to work in the passing game, which we'll talk about here. But I really do think this is a matchup that you want to avoid using Josh Jacobs in. Okay, so let me talk about what running backs have done against the Chicago Bears in the last 4 weeks. In week 1 against the Packers, Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams combined for 18 rushing attempts, only 39 yards, pretty much irrelevant. Week 2, Royce Freeman and and Phillip Lindsay of the Broncos combined for 24 rushing attempts and 90 yards, the best performance that has been put on this Bears defense thus far this season. On top of it, the Redskins the following week, Chris Thompson, Adrian Peterson, 19 rushing attempts, 66 yards, and in the following week after that, this past week against the Vikings, they really did shut down Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison, only for 16 rushing attempts, 40 yards. This defense is no joke. They are going to stop you. They're as good as it gets overall. They have struggled a little bit in the past, but that's when teams are heavily running the ball. 24 rushing attempts, 90 yards. That's not fantastic. Again, that's when the Broncos had the home field advantage and had a pretty tight hold within that game because Mitchell Trubisky was really throwing it away. So when we talk about this specific matchup, I talked about the biggest threat being the ability to score a touchdown or work in the passing game. Here's the issue. The Chicago Bears have only allowed one rushing attempt or one rushing touchdown this entire season. So in the first month, they've only allowed running backs, all the running backs they played against, to score one touchdown and was one rushing touchdown. So the likelihood of Josh Jacobs being a running back that is going to score against them, probably not the greatest likelihood going into week 5. On top of that, in terms of the receiving game, sure, the Bears have struggled against receiving backs. We have seen that, and I'm going to tell you some stats on that kind of provides a proof on that issue. In the first 4 weeks of the season, they've allowed 34 targets, 24 receptions, 212 receiving yards, which if we compare to the rushing yards they've allowed, 212 receiving yards to their 235 rushing yards allowed. I mean, typically you don't want to allow that many yards through the air. And in terms of a PPR scoring format, it helps. A lot of that came from Chris Thompson a couple weeks back and even Dalvin Cook this past week, which has been gashing them in terms of when their pass rush gets after it, one of these running backs slip out and they make some pretty good plays. Here's the issue though. Josh Jacobs has never been a receiving back for this team. In the last 4 weeks of the season, all of September, Josh Jacobs only saw 5 targets. Yeah, only 5 targets. Why? You have Jalen Richard, you have DeAndre Washington, and those guys play far too much for the comfort of fantasy owners relying in the idea that Josh Jacobs is going to be able to produce. When you're bringing in Jalen Richard for targets, even though Jalen Richard has not seen that many, I think this season he saw 9 targets only, it does hurt Josh Jacobs either way. If those targets are going Josh Jacobs' way, I really do believe it's a benefit, but it's not going his way. He's only saw 5 targets in the first 4 games of the season, and he hasn't really been able to do much with them. All of them typically coming from week 1. The last couple weeks been very quiet in terms of targets because of the usage of Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington. So to put it in perspective, the reason why I'm telling you guys to sit Josh Jacobs, the Chicago Bears are a monster defense in terms of stopping the run. Yes, they have been able to give up some work in the passing game, but Josh Jacobs has not established himself as a good enough receiving back in order to give us confidence in starting him. I do think this is going to be a one-sided affair where the Chicago Bears are really putting a lot of pressure on Derek Carr, and Khalil Mack is getting after it, therefore giving over the ball, a lot of 3-and-outs, forcing the Chicago Bears to dictate the game their way, which is running the ball heavily with their backup quarterback, giving the ball to David Montgomery. Hopefully, this is a concise explanation of why I believe David Montgomery is a must start this week and why Josh Jacobs must sit this week. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Hopefully, you enjoyed today's content. If you do like content like this, I can absolutely do more as the weeks progress. Just let me know down below. Click that like button if you guys enjoyed the content. And either way, Hidden Gems isn't going away forever, guys. It'll come back. Trust me, it will. But as long as we're all on the same page, thank you again for watching. And until next time, which will be probably Sunday morning, 8:30 Pacific Standard Time, live stream, talking about fantasy football, answering questions. Be there for those of you who are interested. Thank you again for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys. Peace.